Okay. Hello, greetings. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. So just give us like 3 minutes, we hit the ground running.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Start my ability to be silly, familiar.
So if they go people ask if they
Okay, we're good to go. Thank you so much, guys. This is the 12th of our Afrolongevity educational program. We carefully selected experts from the field of longevity, futurism to help us train um, longevists in Africa. And today we have our instructor and teacher, David Wood. And there is something about David Wood. He's been very supportive he's very supportive, and he's one of those that believe that we can do a lot in Africa, and he doesn't build build fences. He's very supportive of what we've been doing. He was there with us at the 26 degrees south for the ILSA 2023, and he presented a wonderful paper. So a little bit about his background. David Wood is the executive director of Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, also known as LEVF. So he has been very into the singularity and futurism projects for over decades. So he is the chair of London Futurists, a worldwide meetup, which has over 9,500 members, with the mission to anticipate and understand potential shortcomings and major disruptions. So when you see people in the room like this, you think that they are just some of the people that we meet regularly. David was one of those that designed the Symbian computer, the Symbian computers and phones that we use maybe a few years ago. And he's an author of over 12 books, including The Vital Foresight, which happens to be one of um, his best book for me. So he also co-authored the Singularity Principle and The Death of Death. Thank you so much, David. The floor is yours.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. I should say to start off with, I'm not an expert in Africa. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in Africa, although I've visited 6 different countries in Africa in various years. I'm assuming that people in this room know your own countries much better than I do. So what I'm going to try and talk about is issues that have happened in various other countries around the world, where in fact these other countries haven't handled the issues very well. And I'm hoping that smart African countries can actually do better. So my topic is called the longevity dividend, which is an economic idea that by investing in healthy longevity in smart ways, the nation can benefit remarkably, not just from humanitarian purposes, but also from economic purposes. But more precisely, my topic is the longevity dividend paradox, because countries aren't acting on that good economic sense. And the question is, why not? What's missing from activism of longevity enthusiasts? What isn't working? And I will also offer my suggestions on a solution. How can we solve this paradox so that we can get these benefits that many people have been anticipating, but which haven't happened yet? I'll start with a graph. This graph comes from the United Kingdom, but I think similar graphs could be found for many other countries too. Many people feel this is a frightening graph, and I'll explain why. On the horizontal axis, you can see an increasing age. So from the age of 1 up to the age of 91. And on the vertical axis, you can see the annual cost on average of somebody of that age to the United Kingdom's National Health Service. So when you're 10 years old, you don't tend to get ill much. You don't cost the health service a lot of money. When you are 60, you're starting to cost the health service about £2,000 a year. When you're in your early 80s, it's £5,000 per year. You might wonder, some of you, what's happening in the middle here. There's a slight bump around the age of 31 in one of the three curves. And I should tell you, the grey curve is for women's health, and the blue one is average, and the orange one is for men. So this is a slight bump because women at childbearing age, yes, they visit the hospitals from time to time in connection with their pregnancy. But the bigger picture is, of course, that older people cost the health service more money. That's not a surprise. Older people have more things wrong with them at the same time. This matches a very well-known result. It's quite a few years old now, that in the US, all the expenditure from Medicare, the health system there, of all of that, 28% is spent on people in the last year of their lives. The older people are, the more they cost in health services. And that's what frightens people. People wonder, if the population lived longer, wouldn't this mean there would be even greater economic costs? Perhaps a small cost if people lived a bit longer, or a frightening large cost if people lived a lot longer. And I know this is on various politicians' minds. Sometimes I've talked to politicians off the record, and they have basically said, I wish these old people would hurry up and die, because they're expensive for the country. That's the risk. But the idea of the longevity dividend is that actually that won't happen. The idea is, if we can help people to change from being normal agers instead to super agers, they will cost the health service less money, despite living longer. So people who are up there in their 80s will be healthier and won't cost so much money. People who are younger in their 60s won't cost so much money. And ideally, super agers, even in the middle of their 90s, will cost less money. And this notion of super agers has been studied by various researchers. Here's a famous example. I wonder if you in the audience can know what's happening in these two photographs. They are the same four people. They are Helen Reichart, Irving Kahn, her brother, and two other siblings. The photo on the left was taken when Helen was 9 years old, and the photo on the right was when they were all in their 90s. I have to tell you that all of them lived healthily, well beyond the age of 100. Two of them lived to nearly 109, and none of them had any heart disease or cancer or diabetes or cognitive decline by the age of 95. That is the definition of somebody being a super ager. And there's all kinds of interesting things people have discovered by studying super agers. First, they often come in family groups like this group here. Second, they often don't have a very healthy lifestyle. So the researcher who studied this group quite a lot, his name is Nir Barzilai from the Albert Einstein College in New York. He did ask Helen Reichardt once, because Helen would smoke until she was in her 90s. He asked her, "Didn't your doctors tell you to stop smoking?" And she smiled and she said, "Well, I had 4 doctors and they all told me to stop smoking, and they all died before I did." I tell you this not to encourage you to smoke. Of course not. I tell you this to say that if you really want to be a super ager, you probably need to do more than have good lifestyle. You need to have something different about your biology. I should mention also the brother, the one on the ground with a rifle. He also lived until nearly 109. He actually worked 2 days a week until just a few months before he died. He used to get in a cab and go to his office where he would offer investment advice. So he was active all that time. Here's another super ager. This one is still alive. Her name is Ethel Caterham. She actually lives quite close to where I live in Surrey in England, though I've never met her, to my knowledge. She is 116 years old, which means that of all the people who have got good records throughout their life, she is the world's oldest living person, and she is the oldest person ever to live in Britain. And you can't really tell from these pictures, but there is some film of her meeting the person in the bottom left there. That's King Charles, the current king of the UK. He went to meet her because she actually asked him, "It's a shame that you didn't come to meet me for my 116th birthday." And a few days earlier, the king had been dealing with Donald Trump visiting the UK. He needed some light relief after that sort of difficult experience. So he was happy to go and meet this senior citizen, very senior citizen. And she joked with him. She said, "I remember when you were 20, your mother crowned you as Prince of Wales. And when you were 20, all the pretty girls in Europe wanted to marry you." That's what made him laugh. I mention her not just because she's lived a long time. It's because she has no record of any major disease. She did have COVID, but she had only a mild case of COVID. One other example of a super ager who's also over the age of 95, you can see him relatively young on the left, Leonard Bardin. He was the United Kingdom's chess champion in 1954. And the year afterwards, he started writing a weekly column about chess for the Guardian newspaper. His first column was in September 1955, and he has written a column every single week since then. So more than 70 years, without any break, always delivering his content on time. That's pretty remarkable. He is still mentally active at the age of 96. Yesterday, I checked the Guardian's website to see if he's still there, and here's his articles. 7th of November, 8 a.m., his article. 14th of November, 21st November, 28th November. These are top-notch, intellectually demanding articles which he is writing and people are still reading and discussing. Now, you may say these are just 2 anecdotes. These are 2 isolated cases. And you're right in that case. We should not base our science on individual examples. We need to look at statistics. So let me look at some statistics. Again, these are from the UK, but they show how much did somebody cost the health service in the last year of their life. I did mention earlier that that could be up to 28% of the total costs to the health service. Well, interestingly, the older somebody is when they die, the less they tend to cost in their final years. Somebody who's more than 100 costs on average in the UK 30% less. I could only find statistics for this in 2 countries. Maybe some of you could do some research in other countries. The other country where I could find these statistics was in Japan, and it's even more remarkable there. They take the statistics up to people dying at the age of 105 onwards. And these people cost only 30% of the cost of somebody dying at the so-called natural time in their late 70s. So if you can find data from other countries, that might be a very good assignment. You might even get a published paper from that. This is the longevity dividend. If more of us can be like super agers, there can be major economic benefits. Let's try to quantify this. And people have made the effort. The argument is not just do we save money with the health service, not having to treat people for a very long time with multiple conditions. It's also less cost for the family members who would often need to be caregivers. And that cost often isn't included in national economic statistics, but it is quite a drawback. Family members don't mind looking after their elderly and sick family members, but it does stop them being productive members of the economy. And there's also the fact that if people remain healthy, they can contribute into the economy. Like Irving Kahn, I mentioned, when he was 108, he was still contributing 2 days a week with his investment advice. And people also can be active as consumers, not just buying healthcare, but buying all kinds of other goods. This is the notion of the silver economy, or sometimes called the silver tsunami. Can we quantify it? Somebody's accidentally scribbled on the screen. I might just stop my share for a moment and go back into it again so we can get rid of that mark. Let's see where my window has gone. I've stopped it. Just a second. I'll bring that back. And let's bring this back. Coming soon. And here we are. So 2 economists at the University of Chicago did go through the exercise of quantifying the benefits, and their figures were as follows. They said that between 1970 and 2000 in America, increased longevity caused extra social value of $95 trillion. And a trillion, remember, is a million. Now, they said there were costs, of course, to helping people to live longer. There was extra costs for surgery. There was extra medical scans. There were extra medical treatments. But in many cases, people who had ill health were treated and recovered. And so although these treatments cost, they estimated 34 trillion over these 30 years, that still left a net gain of 61 trillion. That was one estimate of the longevity dividend. Another economist, William Nordhaus, who actually has the a Nobel Prize for economics, he calculated that increases in longevity in the West account for 40% of the growth. It's not just because people live longer, but so long as people remain quite healthy, they are wiser and they can often work smarter. That was his analysis. Now, people noticed this was happening, even though nobody had actually asked for it to happen. What happened next is that 4 leading gerontologists, 4 experts in aging, Jay Olshansky, Daniel Perry, Richard Miller, and Robert Butler, wrote an article in 2006 that coined the term the longevity dividend. They said we should pursue this, we should make this active policy. It's economically sensible and financially wise for society to invest in research, not just in aspects of aging, not just in individual diseases of aging, such as heart disease and dementia, but they said into the common root causes, the things that are shared between people who are old that make them more likely to become unwell. They didn't use the term in that paper, but later they've adopted the term geroscience, which is the science of aging. They argued in this paper that today's investment, and today was 2006, there was only 28 million from the whole of the US going into understanding the biology of aging. They said there's a strong economic case to invest much more, 3 billion in aging overall, and at least a third of that onto the basic science of aging, with a focus on genomics and regenerative medicine. This geroscience, as I said, the name later chosen. They said if people would do this, if the governments really got behind it, then the likelihood is that within 15 years or so, all age-related diseases and disorders would be delayed. And so instead of people getting various diseases at the age of 75, they might get them instead at the age of 82. That would be hugely beneficial. So that was the first of many articles that people wrote saying, please, political leaders, invest in understanding and aging and how to cure it. Did the politicians listen? Sorry to say, they did not particularly listen. They did not invest at this scale, neither in the US, nor in Europe, nor in almost any other country in the world. There's only 2 countries in the world where politicians have made pretty good investments in understanding aging and longevity. One of them is Singapore. The Singapore government has brought many leading aging researchers, such as Brian Kennedy and Andrea Meyer, to work at the National University of Singapore, and they are leading a very good research program there to encourage healthier aging. That maybe gets a bronze medal, not a gold medal or a silver medal. They could spend a lot more, but they're doing some good work. The other country in the world that gets perhaps half of a bronze medal is Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia has created the Hevolution Initiative, where a lot of money in principle has been set aside to accelerate healthy aging. They have, give them credit, they have put a lot of money behind something called the Health Span Longevity X Prize, the Health Span X Prize. That is good, but actually they're not spending anything like as much money in practice as they said they would. So the question is, why not? This is the longevity dividend paradox. Why is there so little investment by politicians into the kinds of research recommended by leading gerontologists if the benefits would be so economically large? And I'm going to offer 4 possible answers, and I wonder which of these you might select. Some people say government shouldn't do this kind of thing. Some people say the government shouldn't be a nanny state, and this kind of research should be done by corporations or perhaps by philanthropic bodies. Leave it to the free market. Some people say, well, it's a problem with us humans. We humans don't like to live healthily. We like to eat bad foods, and then we hope we can have a pill to fix it. We just want cures. And this argument is also expressed in the form that pharmaceutical companies aren't interested in prevention. They want to make money by selling people cures for being sick or long-lasting drugs for being sick. So that's the second argument. The third possible argument is that politicians are quite interested in what we say, but when they ask members of the longevity community, well, what kind of research should we do? We, the longevity community, offer many different confusing answers. So the politicians aren't sure what to do. We're not speaking with a sufficiently single voice. And the fourth answer is, again, politicians would like to get these benefits. They're prepared to spend money, but they don't believe that the kinds of benefits I've mentioned will actually result. They think, well, you longevity researchers, you're exaggerating. You're speaking in hype. We might give you a lot of money, but we don't think we will actually get the health benefits that you're speaking about. So I wonder which of these 4 answers you think are likely to be true. I'm going to talk about them one by one. Is this the kind of thing that governments should do? Absolutely. And governments often do take actions to significantly extend health span. And we could look at lots of examples. In the US, for example, in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, the government again and again tried to persuade the car companies to make their cars safer. And there was legislation that people should fit safety belts and use them. There was legislation that made cars behave more safely in the event of an accident, with crumple zones and with steering wheels that would collapse rather than burst into somebody's chest. So there was lots of features which initially the car companies fought against. The car companies said, we don't want people buying cars to think about dangers. They want speed, speed, speed. But the government actually did insist that safety measures should be in place. And as a result, many, many, many fewer people die because of road accidents now than before. Still too many people die, of course. That's another story, but it has been cut back significantly. We could talk about lead in petrol. Once upon a time, it was common to add lead to petrol because it gave a smoother engine performance. Then people thought, maybe the lead fumes are bad for health. Maybe they cause low IQ. Maybe they stunt growth. And again, there was an argument. The chemical companies and the oil companies said, no, we know best. They are safe. Actually, one of the people who was most keen to demonstrate that lead was safe washed his hands in leaded petrol and later died as a result, as it happens. So thankfully, the government said we should have a healthier approach there. And as a result, there's lots of improvement in lifespan. Even more significant was the campaign the government fought around the world to ban smoking. That took a long time, but eventually many people have given up on smoking. And as a result, people live a lot longer and they're a lot healthier. And we could talk about things that some economists think are even more significant, like sanitizing drinking water, promoting and encouraging vaccines, and ensuring that milk is pasteurized. People think that maybe these are the political initiatives that have done most to extend healthy longevity. So governments do get involved. And yes, governments also back research into individual diseases. They spend lots of money trying to research cures for Alzheimer's, dementia, and cancer, and so forth. It's just that they don't research neuroscience. And the question remains, why not? The second answer I mentioned is the view that pharmaceuticals aren't interested in preventative solutions and people aren't interested in preventative solutions. Again, this is completely wrong. There are plenty of examples of preventative medicines which are big business and people happily take them. I could mention statins. Lipitor is a very widely used statin. I've been taking it for 15 years myself on medical advice. And what does it do? It lowers a type of cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and therefore makes it less likely that people will have heart attack and strokes. And this is big business. Preventative medicine is big business. Throughout its lifetime, Pfizer has had revenues of 141 billion. It's out of patent now, so they're not making so much money as before, but it was a very financially successful drug for them, and it was good for people's health. We could look at other examples like Fosamax, which prevents fractures in people with low bone density. That's also had very significant financial benefit to the pharmaceutical that created it. There are drugs to prevent migraines. And on a very simple basis, there are dental hygienists that some of us visit on a regular basis to have our teeth expertly cleaned, our gums cleaned. Why? We spend the money there because we don't want to get gum disease, which can be a terrible thing, especially since if people get gum disease, it increases the likelihood that they will get brain disease. So I will summarize all this by saying that people would choose health span extension treatments once they were available, rather than just being a theoretical idea, and once their positive results were undeniable, once they were evident. So to summarize, I reject the first two answers there, and I believe that the answer must be somewhere else. And in fact, I will argue that we, the longevity community, we are to blame because we have left the governments with too much of a confused message. and we haven't provided them yet with sufficient evidence that will make them want to invest. So we have to improve our advocacy. And perhaps it can be in some of your countries where you can take advocacy to a new, more skilled level. Let's look at this in some detail. When people talk about longevity, they often mean different things. Here I'm borrowing from an analysis by Phil Newman. If you don't know Phil Newman, you should probably subscribe to his longevity technology newsletter. It's one of the best sources of news about longevity products. But as he points out, there are many different levels in what we can call the longevity stack. He talked about 10, I've added an 11th at the bottom. Level 0 is simply when we tell each other, let's respect elderly people. If people are aging, we should help them with mobility solutions. We should not discriminate against them just because they are old. This won't help them to age better, but it means that they will be better treated in society. Level 1 is improved lifestyle management, when often we would listen to what our grandmothers say to us, or what our grandmothers used to say to us. Things like, if you want to live longer, get good night's sleep, don't eat too much, don't drink too much, have good social relationships, have a clear purpose in life, don't get too stressed, and so on. That is the lifestyle management. And in many parts of Africa, I'm sure grandmothers have even more special advice, drawing on local knowledge that certain kinds of foods, certain kinds of herbs, certain kinds of medicines can actually be useful. So there is big business here too in amplifying these messages. Higher up the stack, level L2, there is consumer diagnostics. That's when people increasingly wear rings or watches or continuous glucose monitoring, when we get our blood tested on a regular basis to find out how healthy are we really, when we can measure our health biomarkers, our longevity biomarkers, and that can lead us to change our lifestyle, because we can find out, oh, whenever I eat this kind of food, I get a spike in my sugar, and that makes me more likely to age. Level 3 in the stack is longevity supplements. Longevity supplements are not just natural supplements, but increasingly there's a wide range of drugs, and there are many shops selling all kinds of supplements. Some don't have good evidence, some have anecdotal evidence, and that is indeed big business. Level 4 in this is when people actually have professional clinical services, and usually quite wealthy people go to see these longevity doctors, where they get individual assessment, individual tests, individual advice over a period of time. That's all important, but that's not where I think we should be putting our emphasis. There are things we can do higher up this stack which will have a bigger impact on better health for everyone. So let's look. Level 5, level 6, and level 7 are featured in two very significant books that's come out in the last few years. There's Outlive by Peter Attia and Super Ages by Eric Topol. They basically say we are making big progress with treating cancer, dementia even, heart disease. We are able to detect these diseases earlier, and in some cases, we're even able to stop or reverse aging in specific organs or tissues. That stuff's important, and government should be supporting that more. But there's even bigger wins higher up the stack. Level 8 is sometimes, I'll come to that in a minute. Level 9 and level 10, I'm not going to speak so much about here. That will take me too far afield. That's basically when we get a new body, or even when our minds may be transplanted into a new brain. That's part of what people talk about with longevity. I am going to focus on level 8. Level 8 is when we don't just reverse aging in parts of our body, it's when we reverse aging throughout our body. And this isn't just geroscience. Geroscience was about delaying aging. This is about the notion of becoming younger again. So instead of talking about longevity, I might talk about youngevity. And instead of talking about the longevity dividend, I might talk about the youngevity dividend. And sadly, Many people in the longevity community are not putting enough focus on this level. If governments would invest here, my claim is that we would have much better solutions and we would have much more economic benefit and, of course, humanitarian benefit too. And that's what I'm going to argue in the next few slides. So here's perhaps the most complicated slide I'm going to show. Let's take another short break here, get rid of these scribbles on the screen again. It's something that people do without really intending it. Let me bring that window back up again. Hopefully clean now. Let's give a moment. Where's it gone? Here. So this is life. It's a complicated metabolism, whatever we do, whether it's speaking or listening or eating or walking, making love, playing sport. There's a whole bunch of very complicated biochemical reactions taking place in trillions of cells in our bodies, and each of these cells have billions of chemicals, and they're interacting. And as a result of these interactions, there is some wear and tear. There is damage throughout our cells and throughout our molecules and in the extracellular matrix between our cells. And people argue about what's the main causes of these damage. Some of it's in the environment, some of it's like too much exposure to sunlight, maybe cosmic rays, maybe radioactivity, possibly it's from pollution. There's a lot of pollution nowadays, more than before, which can have an impact. There was the lead in petrol that gave these fumes that I mentioned. There is lifestyle choices. Often some things we live by mean that our lifestyle damages our body. But even if we have a very good lifestyle, still there is wear and tear throughout. And some scientists argue that some of the damage throughout our body is sort of programmed there in evolutionary terms. I'm going to say we don't need to care what that damage, how it's caused, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but there is a big discussion about it. As a result of that damage, we become more prone to diseases, and eventually, as the damage accumulates, we are more likely to get heart disease from damage in our arteries, cancer, stroke, and all these other things. It's a lot of bad news on this slide, you might think, but I'm missing out the good news. The good news is that nature doesn't just give us damage. Nature has given us lots of repair mechanisms. So when we are young and we have some problem, we fall over and skin our knees, or we get a disease, quite often we fight it off quickly. So we have lots of repair mechanisms throughout our body. But as we age, these repair mechanisms don't work so well. And if you understand a little bit of maths, you can see that as the repair doesn't work so well, you'll have more damage, which means that the likely impact of that damage grows exponentially, which means our diseases are more serious the older we are. And for a while, the body's able to suppress them with an immune system and with stem cells, but that too gets damaged over time, with the result that sooner or later the diseases are so severe that we die. So there's life and death on a single chart, and I split it out in 3 columns because there's 3 approaches people can take. One approach is to say, well, let's help people to age with dignity. Let's help them to cope with diseases if possible. Let's respect them. But it's increasingly hard because the damage is accumulating all the time, and it means that the diseases are worse and there are more of them. Which is why some people have said, instead, why don't we edit the metabolism? Let's interfere with this very complex network of biochemical reactions so that, as well as doing the good stuff that we wanted to do, it stops generating damage. And people have tried that, and they have found it to be incredibly hard because there are many side effects of every change. Our metabolism has been finely tuned by evolution, and when we change it, there are often good consequences, but also bad consequences too. And it's on reflecting on this that have led many people to say there's not going to be any progress with level 8 in this longevity stack, not going to be any progress with longevity for many decades because this is too complicated. And I think that's a big mistake. And the reason it's a big mistake is we have a better solution. That's in the middle here. The solution was first proposed by Aubrey de Grey, who works with me in the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, LEVF. In June 2000, he said basically the same as I've been saying here, except that what we should do is remove the damage. Let's allow the metabolism to generate damage as currently, but let's augment natural repair mechanisms with new repair mechanisms. Let's do it periodically, a bit like you visit the dental hygienist periodically to get your gums cleaned periodically. This is still hard, but it's less hard because there's only a limited number of categories of this biological, cellular, and molecular damage. And people argue about exactly how to break down the numbers of categories, but in broad terms, we can look at damage in the genome, in the epigenome, at the telomeres that are at the ends of our chromosomes, at the mitochondria power plants inside all our cells. There's damage linking proteins. There's damage to the store of stem cells, which I mentioned earlier. There's damage inside the matrix, which holds the cells together. The network of signals, sometimes called the signalome, between cells as they send signals to each other via hormones and other things, that gets weakened too. Our ability to recycle the junk inside cells stops working so well, and the ability to recycle individual cells sort of become senescent, stops working. So there are quite a few categories of damage, but the good news is there are lots of promising ideas for how to undo each of these types of damage. And if we can apply these ideas, we can, in stages, reach longevity escape velocity, as I'll sketch out in this image. The idea here is that our life is currently pulled down by aging. We have a certain amount of longevity for a while. And the idea is instead we're going to give ourselves a series of boosts. We will apply over a period of time various treatments that give us extra years of health. And that will allow more time for more treatments to become available to give us more years of health. With each of these boosts providing more health span and lifespan, with each of these boosts allowing us more time to wait for new treatments to become available by more science. Each of these boosts will also change minds about what's possible. The skeptics who think, well, this won't be cured for many decades, they'll start to think, maybe we can make faster progress here. And each time people see the progress, it will unlock more funding and allow faster progress to the point when, a bit like a rocket, after various boosts, it can escape altogether. Longevity escape velocity is when we reach, perhaps by 2035 to 2040, a state when we can, if we wish, be evergreen and experience longevity. That is the vision, which, as I say, in various ways, people like Aubrey de Grey have been championing for 25 years. How much progress has there been in these 25 years? Well, many critics will say not much. I've talked about us flying off, maybe like a rocket or maybe like a butterfly, but what people see instead is the appearance of a chrysalis. No visible progress, a bit static. I'm going to argue that we are on a breakthrough point. We will soon be soaring once we can break out of our current limitations. We are here, and I'm also going to argue a lot's been happening behind the scenes. We have got lots of individual treatments available to deal with individual types of damage. What we need to do now is to string them all together as never before. So to summarize two different points of view about why progress has been slow so far, some people say, well, of course, it's just too hard. Other people, like me, saying, it's hard, but it's not that hard. And we should be trying harder as humanity. People around the world should be cooperating more on this initiative. So the first group says, well, human biology is incredibly complicated. You'll get researchers arguing about what the cause of this damage is. Is it environmental? Is it genetic? Is it evolutionary? And they'll say that the chances of us Achieving longevity is like a medieval alchemist turning lead into gold. They thought they were close, but in reality, they would need centuries of extra science to achieve that. That's why they say huge new scientific breakthroughs are needed. That's why they say don't expect real progress anytime soon. And on the contrary, I will argue that we don't need to understand these things. We already understand enough of the essentials because all we need to do is repair the damage. We can copy examples from nature, from animals that live well, and we can adapt them using our new technologies. So if funding is provided by governments or indeed by other sources, we can make much faster progress and break out of that static appearance. If you believe the first of these approaches, you will be inclined to alter your philosophy. So you say, well, aging isn't that bad, really. Death isn't that bad, really. You will make your peace with death. Perhaps you will make sure you've got cryonic arrangements, so-called Plan B. Perhaps you may even be tempted to invest all your money in AI superintelligence, hoping that when AI superintelligence is created, it will solve these hard problems. And I think that would be a very bad idea because if we are reckless in creating AI superintelligence, it will be out of control and there's no guarantee it's going to do good things to us. On the contrary, I believe what's on the right-hand column here, I believe what we need to do is understand how to influence people so that they see this new perspective. We must understand how to change minds. We should focus on experiments which can change minds, and we should do it in a unified way. And so long as the longevity community is still confused, it's no surprise that politicians aren't jumping up and down and acting on the advice we give them. So let me spend a couple of minutes talking about how minds are changed, how advocacy works. And this is a very big topic, but I'm going to approach it from the point of view of one of my academic backgrounds, which was the history and philosophy of science. I'm showing two people there. You might recognize the one on the left. You probably won't recognize the one on the right. The one on the left is Max Planck, who was a German physicist who won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1918 for his pioneering work on quantum theory, in which he came up with the idea that a photon of light with a particular frequency f will have an energy associated with it. And the constant that he created, h, has gone down in physics as Planck's fundamental constant. The reason I'm mentioning him here, however, is because of what he said later in his life. He said, science progresses one funeral at a time. Old scientists don't change their minds. As he said in the original German, a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. This is a pretty pessimistic assessment on how scientists change their minds. And although he was a great scientist, he was a bad philosopher of science in my view, and I am putting my money with the view of people like Peter Mitchell, who was a British biochemist who got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1978. I won't tell you much about what it was. It was about energy, not energy of photons, but energy inside mitochondria. His whole theory of chemiosmosis and protricity. That's not electricity with electrons, that's electricity with hydrogen ions or protons. But the main point is, if you look at his life story, his ideas were rejected again and again by mainstream scientists until he had more evidence that his theories were correct. And as scientists saw his theories, they changed their mind because of the evidence, because of the actual experiments. And when he got his Nobel Prize, he gave a great speech in which he said to have falsified the pessimistic dictum of the great Max Planck is, I think, a singularly happy achievement. He's not the only Nobel Prize winner who has said things like this. There is plenty of evidence that scientists can change their mind. If you want to find out more about Peter Mitchell and more about mitochondria, I'll just mention in passing this excellent book by Nick Lane. It's about the role of mitochondria in power and sex and suicide, even the meaning of life. But he reviews the work of Peter Mitchell and how he managed to change people's minds. I'll look at one other example of how scientists change their minds. This is the example in which you can see Africa features here, not as a bunch of countries, but as a continent. And anybody as a child who looked at a map of the globe may have wondered, perhaps South America and Africa could fit together, and Europe and North America could fit together. And people speculated about this Pangea, an old idea. And for most of history, people laughed at the idea. There was a scientist called Alfred Wegener, who was an outsider. He trained as an astronomer, couldn't get any job as an astronomer, retrained as a weather forecaster, and spent some time researching the flora and fauna, the fossils, the rocks of different countries, in particular Greenland. And he got more evidence, not just that the countries on different sides of the Atlantic looked like they could have fitted together, but there were many similarities in vegetation and in animal fossils and coastlines which are now far apart. So he argued in a book, in German in 1915, then in English in 1922, that this was the best explanation for how the continents have reached their present positions. And mainstream scientists hated it. The guy in the middle here, he was the dean or the leading expert on the orthodox views of continents. He was the professor of geology at the University of Chicago, and he was very dismissive. If we are to believe this hypothesis, we've got to give up all that we've learned over the last 70 years. And one of my professors at Cambridge, or rather one of the people whose books were still recommended to me when I was at Cambridge studying maths in the late 1970s, Harold Jeffreys, he also wrote at length about why this idea was ridiculous. He couldn't imagine a force that would make continents go across the Earth's surface. And he wrote at some length that the idea just doesn't make sense. If the Earth was weak enough for plates to move, mountains would crumble under their own weight. And they argued that all the things that people had spotted were just strange coincidences. They weren't exact. And there was lots of laughter. People said, this is a kind of a mental disease to think such a thing. Moving crust disease, wandering pole plague. And they even got a bit nationalistic. They said, Wegener, he's a German, it's what you expect. They are looking for big theories when in fact good science is full of small theories. And there's a lot more I could say about this. I could point to a very interesting philosopher of science, Naomi Oreskes, who said that often scientists who are bought into an existing way of thinking, they don't like big ideas. They much rather have lots of small little ideas. Solve a little bit of aging here, solve a bit of aging there. And outsiders, whether it's Wegener in the world of plate tectonics, or whether it's somebody like Aubrey de Grey in the field of aging, they are often rejected by mainstream because mainstream is uncomfortable with a single big idea. Well, scientists changed their minds about plate tectonics because there was new scientific evidence. I don't have time to explain this in any depth. I will just say there were two things that people discovered. They discovered that rocks often had inbuilt magnetic orientation, which reflected where they were when they were formed. And it became clearer that many rock formations must have formed somewhere else on the Earth. And India was a special case. There was lots of evidence that India seem to have been formed, rocks there seem to have been formed when India was south of the equator, whereas nowadays it's north of the equator. So that opened some people's minds. And then people discovered something else, that there were trenches at the sea floor where there was evidence that the trenches were slowly moving apart and they were generating new types of rock there. And people speculated, well, if this theory is really true, we should find a certain pattern of magnetic orientation. And they looked and they found it. And almost every scientist quickly changed their mind on the basis of the new evidence. So to pull this together, there was a view for a long time that continental positions are fixed, but when a new evidence was presented with a new mechanism, most geologists changed their mind. I'm arguing that we can have the same in just a relatively short period of time. It's not that continental positions are fixed. It's the idea that lifespans were fixed, and we can actually fix it now because we can actually make them longer. We can move lifespans by doing the kinds of things I've spoken about, damage repair mechanisms. Sadly, researchers aren't yet changing their mind because we still need more evidence that when you put these different damage interventions together, they will have big results. And that's what we're doing in LEVF. The vision is, yeah, we can learn from what's happened in biology. We can copy them, what makes human superages live long, what makes other animals live long, what makes them live without aging. And we can copy new mechanisms so long as we do lots of experiments to find out how these damage repair mechanisms would interact. So we're doing that in LEVF. We have run one large project, which you can read about on our website, levf.org. We started it in February 2023 with 1,000 mice, and we gave them up to 4 different treatments, spread out into 10 groups, or 20 groups actually, counting male and female groups separately. These mice would normally live 2.5 years, and we started treating them when they were middle-aged, at 1.5 years, which is a bit similar to treating humans at the age of 50. Mice would normally live another 12 months, and our goal with these experiments is to prove that if you give them the right combination of damage repair interventions, you will double their remaining life expectancy, which would be like taking a bunch of humans at the age of 50, when they would normally expect to live on average to about 80, and instead they would on average live to 110. Of course, it doesn't quite translate like that, but that's the general idea. So here's the results, or some of the results from RMR1. All the mice are now dead, and we can look at them. You can see at the top there, 100% of them are alive, and at the bottom there are 0% alive. It moves across from 19 months. We actually started the experiment when they were 19 months old, and the oldest mice died when they were 39 months. But the interesting thing is if you compare the different lines, the 10 different lines, the one in dark blue is the one that had none of the treatments, and the area under its curve is the least, which means it had the shortest average lifespan. And the mice that got all 4 treatments, that's in dark red, they have the largest area under their curve. We didn't double their lifespan, we increased it about 1.6 times. There are other complications with this that I won't go into, but there was enough that lead us to think, well, we should now do RMR2 with more treatments, and in fact some new treatments that have become available in the 3 years since we did that experiment. So we're going to line up, dependent on funding, 10 different treatments, which I won't explain now, but you can read about them on LEVF's website. And it is our vision that this will cause some mice to live longer than any such mice have lived before, and that is going to change minds. So to briefly summarize what I've been saying, sadly, we've got a vicious cycle of unchanging minds. Why there hasn't been enough progress is the decision makers who control these large public funds, they're not feeling enough public pressure to invest in this field, in part because the public doesn't get their favorite influencers talking to them about this. When the public goes to their favorite large audience podcasters or YouTube influencers, they talk a little bit about this, but they don't talk in any convincing way because in turn the longevity scientists as a whole, we don't have a unified approach to this, and because there aren't yet sufficiently compelling evidence. And so it's a sad cycle. Lack of funding means the scientific projects are going too slowly, which means scientists aren't changing their mind. And that looks like bad news, but actually we're going to drive the whole thing in reverse. We're going to have lots more good news. There is some research that has shown, RMR1, that you can do this to a certain extent, and the more that we can do it, the more we'll get more longevity scientists flipping out of that skeptical mode, flipping into a positive, supportive mode. That's going to lead to podcast hosts and YouTube influencers getting onto the same message. It's going to lead to members of the public changing their minds and saying, you know what? I'm not going to make my peace with aging. I don't want myself and my family members to suffer the horrors of aging. I want the whole of the country, the whole of the world to engage in a war against aging. That's going to energize politicians who will then apply funding, and the whole thing will go round much more quickly. Now, you may think this is a bit simple and naive. I would agree, I've got a much longer version of this diagram, which I won't talk through. I'll just point out that what's really important is to agree the experiments that will make the difference. We need a unified approach here. So I'm advocating at the bottom of this, you can see RMR, the robust mouse projects, which can happen quickly. And as people go around this chart several times and get more enthused, we will lead in due course to not just RMR, robust mouse rejuvenation, but robust human rejuvenation, longevity, escape velocity, and I think we could indeed have that by 2040, perhaps even 2035. The Achilles heel of this is still only a slow flow of funding at the very beginning, but that is changing as well. This is the last main slide. In the course of 2025, we have engaged with the decentralized science community. We, LVF, have engaged with that community. They have developed, with our help, an agent called Aubrey, A-U-B-R-A-I. By the way, if you take nothing else away from this presentation, you should check out aubr.ai, or you can find it on Twitter, AUBRAI_, where you can interact with it. You can ask it your questions about longevity and biology. This is an agent, a bit like a large language model, but it has been specially trained by Aubrey de Grey's writings and insights. It has been created in partnership with LEVF and two of the leading organizations in the decentralized science space. And very importantly, it has been linked to decentralized science funding tools. Decentralized science is often funded by a crypto token. We have an Aubrey governance token, and it has already raised enough money that we can start the pilot phase of RMR2. Earlier this year, we received a bit over $500,000, which is a great start. And every time somebody buys or sells one of these crypto tokens, 0.7% of that is taken as a transaction tax and made available to boost the research. Why do people buy these tokens? Well, each person must make their own decision. In part, they can participate in decisions over the development of new ideas arising from research funded by these tokens. They can gain earlier or fuller access to some of the features of Aubrey when that agent has new features. More generally, it demonstrates support for work taking place at LEVF, and it demonstrates that people are part of shaping the future. I won't say of longevity science, but longevity science. So, the longevity dividend paradox can be solved by transitioning to longevity, focusing on level 8 of that hierarchy and ensuring that there is experiments which you can show to your government officials. This is real data, which is reasons why, in various ways, government should be investing in this. And if you've still got many questions about this, of course, I'm not going away. I'll stay to answer questions, but I will point you to a longer essay I've written called 10 Ways to Help Accelerate the End of Aging, which goes through that big diagram in some care. And you can find that by Googling for it. You can find that on my writings on the Mindplex magazine. And I've gone a bit over time. I've been a bit controversial, but I honestly feel this is what the longevity community needs to do, what we need to do globally, and what we need to do locally as well. Thank you very much. And some of you are still here.
Yes, we are here. It's been a wonderful section. It's been electrifying. As usual, I never expected anything less. I told them about you and the nature of your teachings and how amazing your teaching. So I would thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for making our time to be here. Let's start with questions. There are some questions in the chat box. Duru, are you there? Okay, the first one says,
yes,
thank you,
sir,
sir,
I
for...
am.
Okay, can you read out the questions? Oh my God, a lot of questions. Okay.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, the first question from Sonny Ofo. He says, thank you for simplifying things here, sir. But what do you mean by experiments which can change the mind in the concept of longevity?
So I think that it's a great question, but I think that question was posted before I gave my answer, which is we need to demonstrate that certain treatments, first of all, they can extend the lives of simple mammals. You can do this as a fairly short-term experiment because these mammals don't live very long. So you can do that whole experiment in just a couple of years. But then also we must be able to demonstrate that various treatments can improve lifespan of humans. And we can't wait 50 years to verify it, but what we can do instead is you can measure various biomarkers of aging. And people argue about which biomarkers of aging are most reliable, but there are certain indications that in various ways people have got younger in at least some parts of the biology. So we need to be able to show to the political leaders, look, here's an experiment. This amount of treatment was given. It was given to an actual set of people. It wasn't given to controls. And if you compare the biomarkers later, you will see, hopefully, that the people who got the treatment were by various estimates younger. The people in Singapore that I mentioned are very good on this. They're doing lots of experiments. There are other experiments around the world as well. But whatever else people do, you should probably connect to the National University of Singapore's weekly podcast, not weekly podcast, weekly webinar, in which they very often cover topics like this.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Sonny, I hope you got him correctly, right? Okay, the second question, is there a way to determine how long one could live? This is coming from Mr. Victor.
Thanks for the question, Victor. I'll sidestep the question to start with. It's not a question of how long people could live in the future. It's people should have the choice if they want to keep living. Sadly, often people end up getting old and they are unhappy about it. And what I'd want to give people is the choice if they want to live longer. So they may want to live longer to see their grandchildren grow up. They may want to live longer so they can travel more and experience more of the world, to play more sports, to study more. So my view is that in principle, everybody should have the chance to live as long as they want to. Now, we can't tell now how long people could live because we don't know how quickly damage repair mechanisms can be applied in safe ways. We have a bunch of damage repair mechanisms which are being explored, but we don't know to what extent some of them might be counterproductive. So, to answer the question properly, we still need more research. And in order for that research to take place, we have to encourage the people who control funds to get involved.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Miss Peace is coming with a whole lot of questions. Number one, she said, what method of systemic reversal of aging should Africans adopt? The second question, concerning getting our grandmother's advice according to your slides, sir, how do we get this advice when most of our knowledgeable grandparents have passed on? And her third question, what kind of longevity research is best for Africans? Her fourth question, how does lipitor affect memories and the brains? And her fifth question, what lifestyle changes do you suggest instead of medications? Thank you.
5 great questions, and thanks for writing them all down because my brain could not remember them all, sadly, at my age. But let's start at the last one. What lifestyle changes do I recommend instead of medications? Well, I recommend both. I don't think that lifestyle changes by themselves will make us live a great deal longer, perhaps up to 20 years if we get everything right. But that of course is useful. But most people with lifestyle changes probably will only live maybe 5 or 10 years longer. So there are certain clear things. Stopping smoking, despite what Helen Reichart said, stopping smoking is a great boost to longevity. Controlling our diet is a good boost as well. getting good sleep is important, and mixing with happy, positive people rather than miserable, negative people. All of these, there is evidence that will help us to live longer. But that will not make us live indefinitely long. Even people who have got great lifestyle do still get old, sadly, and sometimes they get old quickly, which seems very unfair. So we need not just that lower level of the longevity stack. Remember, I had 11 levels. We need treatments from all different levels. Question 4, how does Lipitor, the statin, affect memory and the brains? I don't know the answer to that, but I do trust that the various doctors who have been prescribing this to me, they're aware that sometimes there are some side effects to statins. It's not always recommended for everybody. They have to look at the different people. But in my case, I inherited from my father a tendency to have too much calcium in my arteries. And when the doctors noticed that in a scan some time ago, it was recommended I start taking statins then. And every so often I have blood tests to check about various possible bad side effects of statins. Some people say that if you take a statin, you should also take something called CoQ10, but the evidence isn't completely clear. Some doctors roll their eyes when I mention that, and others say possibly. So what I'm saying here is it's complicated, and we need each to get individual advice. What kind of longevity research is best for Africans? Well, I'm not going to try and give a simple answer to that. I think Africa is not one country. It is, of course, many different countries, and the situation is different, thankfully, in many different countries. You each need to find out what's applicable in your own locales. The longevity research I hope you'll be able to contribute to is at level 8, because although all these lower levels are helpful and useful, the one that's going to have the biggest impact all around the world is if we can actually undo the damage rather than just slow down the accumulation. Question 2 about grandmothers. I didn't mean literally our individual grandmothers. I meant the kinds of things that wise people from the past have passed down. And you can find this advice in many places. It's even been written down by people in England in 1600 or in Italy, I think even before that. There are various people who lived a long life and they wrote down their reasons for living long. And so, of course, we should treasure the wisdom that our own ancestors pass on to us, but also we should be a little bit skeptical too, because some of the advice some of our grandparents passed isn't exactly right. So I was being a little bit loose in my terms. What I meant is that there's general good advice which is well understood, and that will help us to an extent, but only an extent. Again, if we truly wish to get rid of the downward spiral of aging, we need treatments from higher up that stack. Finally, question 1's a bit similar to question 3. It's asking, well, how should Africans adopt it? Again, I will say it depends to an extent in which part of Africa you're in and on your own local situation. It also depends on your own local skill set. So if you've got particular skills in, I don't know, mitochondria or telomeres or in biomarkers of aging, that's probably what you should pursue. But a good piece of advice generally is keep your eye on the big picture. Don't get too bogged down in your individual projects that you miss bigger opportunities elsewhere. And the biggest opportunity of all is that all of us can benefit from longevity.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much. Honora, can you ask your question?
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
I hear you fine. Nice and clear.
Okay. My question is about prostate cancer. So
Prostate
I don't
cancer.
know I don't know if prostate cancer is attributed to old aging, because I know a man that was buried this month, like November 9th, like that, and the man is not living a life, like taking processed food, all this alcohol, or taking hard drug. So he lived a life and he had been eating natural food, eating naturally. And I can say the man is active in bed. So if at all it's about sex, So I'm asking, my question goes direct, like, what is the main cause of prostate cancer? Is it attributed to old age disease or what? And again, is it truly that without being sexually active, that you will have prostate cancer in the old age like that? So that is my question.
So I'm not an expert on sexual activity, so I can't really answer that, sadly. I can point out, however, that all of these cancers, they tend to increase in likelihood the older people get. So it used to be the advice you would get. If you don't want to have cancer, stop smoking, because if you smoke, you are much more likely to get cancer. But a better piece of advice is if you don't want to get cancer, stop aging, because aging increases at an even larger rate the likelihood of getting cancer. But there are still cases, sadly, of people who get these cancers at young age. And it's truly tragic, of course. It's tragic, I would say, even when an old person dies. But maybe there's a special kind of tragedy when somebody dies of young cancer. So what are the causes of these cancers? And I don't want to be glib. Can be many different causes. There can be genetic causes. Sometimes people have got something in their genes which predisposes them to a type of cancer, which makes them more likely to get it when they're young. Sometimes it can just be an environmental accident. So there might be some radiation or cosmic rays or something which just purely by bad luck affects this person. So I wouldn't want to say it's down to lifestyle, too much sex or too little sex. I wouldn't want to speculate on an individual case. I'm sure the doctors who studied him might have more of an answer. But my main answer is this. We should be fixing the damage much earlier than it turns into a full-blown cancer. Every cancer is easier to deal with when they're found at stage 1 rather than at stage 3 or stage 4. So how do we determine when people have got this? Well, it's because there's some kind of damage that is happening earlier in their lives. And ideally, we should all be finding ways that we can detect these earlier things. So there are companies who are bringing out systems now to check our blood for signs of cancer. This has been envisioned for a long time. Some companies overhyped their solutions in the past, but there's at least 2 companies that have got very promising solutions that we would be able to detect at an earlier phase when somebody might have cancer. And if you can see this damage at that stage, then that's when we can intervene. The sad thing is that when people aren't tested and suddenly it's too late. And yeah, we all know people who died far too young because of prostate cancer or something else.
Okay. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so
Thank you so much, David. I got some questions. There are other questions that I think is this professor from, yeah. Okay. Professor Charity is asking, at what age, like chronological age, does one start aging, or is it chronic disease? Is chronic disease the symptoms of aging?
We are aging even while we're still in the womb. There are various measures in which already some damage is accumulating, but it grows exponentially. So to start off with, there are only small signs. Some other aspects of aging are linear, so epigenetic damage, epigenetic transformation of our cells. Epigenetics means that there is various methyl groups, such as CH3 group, gets attached to some of the C parts of our DNA, and it affects how the various genes can be accessed during metabolism. And that grows linearly, it seems, throughout our lives, starting even when we're in the womb. So I wouldn't want to say aging starts at a certain time, although it does accelerate because as we get more damaged, the damage tends to result in other sorts of damage. When we're young, we've got lots of repair mechanisms. As we get older, the repair mechanisms don't work so well. Chronic disease is the symptom of aging. That's how I see it. As we age, our body is less able to cope with small insults and injuries. Our immune system doesn't work so well. That's why the people who died most from COVID, they tended to be elderly people because their immune system wasn't so good. And so it is a gradual thing. And that's why we can tolerate, on the whole, a bit of damage. But so long as we are intervening on a regular basis to undo that damage with the kinds of treatments that we in LEVF are recommending, then we can remain vital and creative and healthy for as long as we like.
Thank you. Vikas is asking if everyone is allowed to choose when they want to die. Don't you think it will raise some ethical issues in the sense that the idea of death to an extent drives people to make meaning out of their life and how they live?
So there's a whole bunch of ethical issues about longer lives, of course. I've written at some length about them. Let me get one of my books. So the abolition of aging. Oh, you can't see it, can you? Oh, there it is. The abolition of aging. There's a lot in here about the ethical issues, and there's a lot in here. Can you see this one? The death of death. And it says here the moral defense of aging. But there are real questions, to be sure. Now, I don't think this particular one is that critical, because I think people can be motivated to do things even without thinking that one day they might die. If I look at young children, the reason they jump out of bed in a hurry and they're so excited isn't because they're thinking in 80 years' time they'll die. They want to live because of life. They want to live because of life, not because of death. So I think we can find other reasons to motivate ourselves rather than thinking, well, eventually we're going to die. There can be other deadlines. You know, when a football match is going on, the football match has a certain fixed amount of time, and that's fine. It doesn't mean all the players die at the end of it. It just means that if they want to accomplish something, they've got to do it in that time period. Otherwise, they can't score anymore. So we can organize life so that there are lots of full times and the end of games, which will keep us all excited and active. I don't think we need to worry about boredom on that account.
Okay. The last question from the chat before I start asking my question. Michael is asking, when the breakthrough to treat aging finally comes, how affordable will the treatment, I think that's what it's trying to be, say the treatment be for the masses, especially to Africans, for Africans, yeah.
So one example here is the cost of the COVID vaccine. Initially, people were very worried when COVID came out. First, they were worried it would take a long time to get a vaccine. Secondly, they were worried it would only be for the wealthy people. When you develop something at scale, when you have a whole bunch of clever people working on it, you can find ways to make it cheaper and cheaper. So initially, the treatments may be expensive, but once the governments see how important it is, they will invest in reducing the cost. And it will be enlightened governments who will actually cover the costs of these treatments, because they have two choices. Either they spend a bit of money in the short term covering these costs, or they let people get ill and sick, and then there's a whole bunch more money they have to pay as a result of the economic costs of these people being chronically ill for a long time. So any enlightened government is going to do two things. One, it's going to try to drive down the costs by encouraging innovation and scale. And secondly, it will also subsidize the costs. I don't deny that some of the costs to start off with may be more expensive, but as time goes on, we should find cheaper and cheaper ways of getting the same results.
Okay, someone just asked, sorry, still on Lipitor. How exactly does it help reduce the risk of heart attack and strokes? Because my uncle is a medical doctor and currently down with stroke, and he's over 54 years. Are there treatment therapies or protocols that could support his recovery? I would appreciate your insights.
So what statins do is they try and prevent strokes in the first place. If somebody has had a stroke already, sadly, I'm not sure whether statins are the appropriate treatment. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't want to offer anything that might sound like medical advice, because almost certainly it'd be wrong. And the uncle and his colleagues are probably better suited to figuring out the treatment of somebody who already has a stroke. I don't know whether he was taking statins before. I don't think statins completely prevent strokes, all types, because strokes can happen for multiple reasons. But one of the causes of strokes and heart attacks is increased LDL cholesterol, which is one of the things that statins currently reduce. But there are other treatments coming along which will do a better job of actually undoing the damage of these LDL cholesterol. What statins do is they slow down the accumulation. There will be treatments from various companies that actually clean out some of that free cholesterol and clean out some of the other damage. So I think that within the next 3 or 4 years, there will be products available that will be even better than statins for that purpose. So I'm sorry again, I can't offer medical advice for somebody who already has a disease. That would be very irresponsible of me. One thing scientists need to do is know their field of competence, but also know where they're incompetent. And I am not competent to offer particular medical advice for people with particular diseases. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you so much, David. My question. First of all, I will ask a question on the longevity dividend paradox. You describe the paradox where society benefits immensely from slowing aging, yet we underinvest in the science. In Africa, for example, we have governments spending less than 5% of its GDP on health. What specific economic argument or model have you found most effective in convincing policymakers to see longevity as an investment, not a luxury?
Well, the best example in history was the anti-smoking drive. So various doctors came up with clear evidence that if people were exposed to advertising about smoking without the countervailing pressures, then there would be many costs involved. So that is often held up to be the best single example of convincing politicians to spend money on a preventative healthcare. There were the other examples I mentioned about government spending money to improve the safety of cars, government spending money to encourage vaccines, government spending money to ensure milk was pasteurized. That was a cause of many childhood diseases before, when people were given milk directly from cows, which sadly contained various bad content, contaminations. So these are some examples to look at. The UK, as I said, has not done tremendously well in this. I can't say follow the UK's advice. Sadly, the UK did have a parliamentary group called the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity, set up by one of our previous Prime Ministers, Theresa May, while she was still the Home Secretary, or I think that was her. Anyway, she championed it for a while, but after a while, people just lost interest because I think they didn't believe that there were things that could make sufficient difference. So there are still people working on this. There's a professor called Andrew Scott, who used to work at the London Business School. He has a very good book called The Longevity Imperative, if I've got that right. I'll put his name in the chat. So he is one person that the UK government is still listening to. So Professor Andrew Scott used to be, as I said, at the London Business School. He has now got a new role. He's actually funded by Larry Ellison's organization. Larry Ellison is one of the richest men in the world. He is the founder and CEO or founder of Oracle. He has founded an initiative in Oxford, and one of the things they're doing in Oxford is studying exactly this field. So maybe somebody listening to this could actually do some research and see what that group is there coming up with. But Andrew Scott's book, I think it's called The Longevity Imperative.
Yeah.
I will check that because I'm now interested. Let me talk to my dear phone. Where's it gone? What is the name of the book by Professor Andrew Scott?
Andrew Scott is the author of 26 books. Here are the first three. The 100-Year Life,
The
Life Shift.
longevity
Life Shift.
imperative is actually correct.
Okay. Okay. In your slide breaks longevity into lifestyle management, diagnostics, supplements, disease treatments, organ regenerations, systemic reversal, and consciousness preservation. For an emerging region like Africa, which levels can be responsibly accelerated first without overwhelming our regulatory and clinical infrastructure?
So there's clearly work that can be done at the lower levels of the stack, and I don't want to say that's a mistake. I don't think it's the best place for the whole world to concentrate on. Let me bring this slide up again. I don't think it's the best place for the whole world to concentrate on these lower levels. I think the biggest effects in due course are up here at the level 8, as I've called it. Let me get that bit of the slide up again. There we go. But again, you have to look at what's possible. Politics is the art of the possible rather than some vision of something that's hypothetical or utopian. So there may be things you can do at each of these levels. I'm quite skeptical about longevity supplements yet, L3, but I would look at what Singapore is doing. Singapore is in some sense a richer country than some of the African countries, but they are doing a whole bunch of longevity clinics, and so you might find what they're doing there. So I'll just say that again. Look at the Healthy Aging Initiative of NUS. That's I think that's called the National University of Singapore.
Yeah.
And they've got two excellent people from
Professor.
Professor Brian Kennedy and also Andrea Meyer, and they both know a lot about clinics as well. So the clinics vary a lot, and there's a lot of nonsense in some of the clinics. So what these people are trying to do there, I think you also have got one of your advisors. It's one of Evelyn Bischoff, isn't she? Evelyn Bischoff.
Yeah.
She is one of the people who are campaigning for high quality standards in longevity clinics. And so what you can do is understand the standards that are proposed for these longevity clinics. Otherwise, first of all, they may not do much good. They may make a lot of money, but they may actually not make people healthy. So figure out what the standards are, and apply them or speak to your governments about adopting these standards locally.
Yeah, we're actually working on that with the Zulu Kingdom, the KwaZulu-Natal province. So Aubrey was there when we had the meeting, and we are looking at the proposals and strategies from Professor Andrea Meyer, the one she put together for us, concerning how they started the longevity supplement program in the university. So we're working hard to ensure that we have standard for the longevity clinics. So on the moral defense of physical immortality, in your book, The Death of Death, you defended the moral case for ending aging. Africa has strong cultural, religious, and ancestral identity around death and life cycle. How do we ethically communicate the moral case for extreme longevity in the communities that sees aging as a natural or spiritual thing?
So the first argument is that many things that are natural are terrible. There are many aspects of nature which historically have caused a great deal of problems. Locusts are natural. Locusts committed terrible damage. To an extent, lots of malaria is natural. We have coexisted with malaria and many of the other diseases. So we don't just say this is nature, we are going to accept it. Well, actually, we do say we can accept it when there's nothing to do about it. So there is a wisdom that says if we can't change it, we better learn to accept it. It's one of the most famous prayers, or it's quite a recent prayer. It's from the 20th century. God, grant me the grace to accept the things I cannot change, but grant me the courage to change what I can change, and grant me the wisdom to know the difference. I think it's very wise words in there. So if there really is nothing we can do, then we need to commit philosophically to it and say, well, this is a shame, but there are maybe some good things that come out of it. But I don't think we should just accept that. For generations, people were told families need to give their children to go off and fight wars. And if they die, it's for the glory of the country. I mean, there's a famous phrase, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. It was, I think, from Roman times. It's sweet and honorable to die for your country. And I say, no, we should not accept that tradition. So we should respect some traditions, of course, but everybody should be open to the possibility that, science puts new possibilities in our hands, and things we needed to accept in the old times are no longer things we need to accept now. It used to be true that many women would have many children, many of whom would die in early childhood. My wife's from Korea, and in Korea, they didn't give a child a name until they were 100 days old. And they didn't celebrate the birth much. And when the child reached 100 days, that's finally when it was accepted as it's likely going to live. Although even then, maybe half of them still died before they reached maturity. So that's how the world used to be. And now, thankfully, big thanks to science and medicine, we are doing much better than nature. So I don't accept the naturalistic fallacy. And if people push back against it, what I will say is we want to give people choice. If people choose to die, then that is their choice, so long as they don't force that choice on other people as well. I would rather give people the choice to continue living when they want to continue living.
Okay. So, my last question. If Afrolongevity wants to train Africa's first longevity scientists, clinicians, ethicists, and regulators, what core competencies must be prioritized in the next 5 years for us to be part of the global longevity escape velocity timeline, rather than spectators? Then, as a futurist, how would you frame the 3 most plausible scenario for Africa's population in the global longevity race by 2040? And which levels should we pull now to shift towards the most desirable scenario?
So one thing that can make all this go wrong is increased climate change. And if there's more climate change, there's more devastation to agriculture, there's more migration, there's more diseases. So if we're looking between now and 2040, we have to keep campaigning on a global level for proper action to transition from dirty energy usage to clean energy usage. And this cannot just be done by Africa. This cannot just be done by Europe. So Africa must engage in the global conversation to ensure that the environment evolves in a healthy way. And even if we've got lots of drugs, it's not going to help us if there are many more storms, droughts, and new diseases coming out of close proximity of animals and people living together in new circumstances. So one thing Africans must do is keep an eye on that particular issue. More generally, I say the most important skill for all of us is to be able to constantly relearn. Because whatever we have learnt often will no longer be the important thing in another year's time. And I can't say what I'm going to need to know in a year's time because I can't know which new treatments will be available. I can't know which AI tools are appropriate. I can't know which new partnerships will be critical. I can't know whether it's going to be Chinese technology or Israeli technology or Nigerian technology. I can't say which of them are going to be significant. We have to be ready to learn things new. And so the ability to learn things new is possibly the most important skill of all. But thankfully, there are a couple of things that can help us to learn. One is we've got to be ready to undo some of our previous knowledge. In order to learn again, sometimes we need to unlearn. And that's hard as well because we are often committed. We think, well, I've known this all my life. It's a bit similar to your earlier question. The wisdom of elderly people is that it's good to die. And we often, in our own lives, we've got things that were hard-won pieces of practical knowledge. And perhaps they are no longer the right thing to do in the near term. Maybe we've got to change. So how do we actually change? First of all, we can change by being part of good communities, people who are plugged into change, people who are not static, people who are not backward looking, people who are forward looking. And that community in part is an African community such as you've created. So everybody listening to this should continue to deepen their rapport with the African longevity community. But it also means finding ways to connect to other longevity communities around the world too. Figuring out which projects are meaningful, which projects sadly are more of a waste of time and you need to disengage. And even the projects that in 1 year were promising may turn out to be not the best ones in the next year. So the first thing there is community. The second thing is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence means not just that we know a lot, but we're not upset when we discover that we are a newcomer in a new field. We're not embarrassed to make a mistake. Because when we are now learning something new, of course we will make mistakes. And it's often embarrassing to make a mistake. And often we criticize each other when we make a mistake. We say, oh, we're stupid or you're stupid. Well, that kind of thing is not helpful to learn. It's not helpful to unlearn and relearn. So we all need to be better at nurturing our own and each other's emotional intelligence. And the third thing that can help us in this very important skill of learning is AI. So we all need to connect to AIs that we can learn to trust. And so I do encourage people again to look at aubr.ai, which has been typed back into the chat. Either form a bigger rapport with Aubrey de Grey, who is sort of, his ideas are expressed through this AI agent. But I'm not going to say that's the only one. There's excellent online help to learn things from Google's Gemini, from Anthropic's Claude, from OpenAI and others as well. So let's use technology to help us to relearn quickly. And unless we're able to learn and relearn, we may well fall behind. And even if we're clever, even if we've been successful earlier in our lives, even if we're part of great corporations, I predict that many of these great corporations will fail. I even predict that many great countries will fail if they're not able to be nimble in this sense of relearning, which is why I emphasize it as the most important skill.
Okay, thank you so much.
I didn't answer all your question, but I gave a long answer to bits of it.
Yes, it made sense. Dr. Obani, are you there? Please, can you give us the closing wrap? Dr. Obani. Okay.
Good evening, all.
Good evening.
Okay, I want to thank our speaker, David Wood, for this concise and very interesting lecture this evening. At least the last part of it capped it all. We should be ready to learn and unlearn, because the world that we're living in now is a world of knowledge and information. So this is the time for us to discard any old prejudice and grasp anything, all that is available to us, to make sure that we move our continent forward in terms of learning. And they talk about death. I was actually interested in the book that David Wood wrote, Death of Death, because I believe that the world will get to that stage where death will be overcome, and it's going to be true science. So it's an open vista, and everybody should discard that prejudice that death is something that we cannot overcome. Even the Holy Script says it, that it has been overcome. So it will be true science, because everything keeps on moving, and we have to catch on for us in Africa. So thank you, David Wood, for this lecture. Thank you, everyone who has connected. And I hand over to you, Osina Kachuku. Thank you for this opportunity for us to learn. And I would also say we can only get better. Tomorrow's lecture, I believe, will be also interesting, and we have much more to learn. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. We truly appreciate your time, your depth of thinking, and your commitment to a future where aging is no longer inevitable. Thank you once again for strengthening our journey here in Africa. Take care.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Great questions, everybody.